This is a very surprising result because it shows that Armenians are not homogeneous genetically. This is really a rainbow of different genetic groups. When you look at the Irish, for example, 85% of them belong to this group. When you look at the Poles and the Russians and the East Europeans, you find frequencies of 80% of R1A group, which is only 3% for us. When you look at Arabs, Arabs from Saudi Arabia, not the Arabs from Syria, Iraq, but Arabs from Saudi Arabia, the Bedouins, Yemen, etc., 80% of them are J1. So in most places in the world, specific ethnic groups have a concentration of one haplogroup. Armenians do not. And when you actually put these against the diagram that I showed you before, you'll see here that the biggest group Armenians belong to is on this side, and it differentiated from the others about 50,000 years ago. So if one of you is R1, B1, B2, and another one of you is J1, like me, for example, our potential common ancestor lived 50,000 years ago, so we're way beyond genealogy, history, Armenians, or anything. The second largest groups, there are 3 of them in the 10 to 20% range, J2, J1, and J. They are also quite different from each other, and they separated a long, long time ago. And then you have 3 groups which represent 5 or 9% of the Armenian population, and you have here 5, 6, 7 groups which are between 1 and 4%. This is quite diverse, and it shows that we are really, from a genetic point of view, very diverse. We are not all the descendants of Haik, for those of you who believe that. So maybe they're there, but I don't know which group he belonged to. We have to find him and test him. Now, it gets even more diverse than that when you dig a little bit deeper. Because here you say to yourself, okay, everybody who's J2 had a common ancestor. Yes, but when? J2 is about 25,000 years old, we think. And there are many types of J2s. J2A is about 18,000 years old. When you look at the mutations within J2, the initial tree I showed you showed only the mutation for J. Here you see the tree of J2. Again, what I said before is still valid here. Someone who belongs to this group has this mutation, this mutation, this mutation, this mutation. Every time it's one man who developed that mutation, who wasn't killed, who didn't die, who had sons who were successful, who multiplied, who had more sons, and this whole lineage survives. There are many groups that are inexistent now because they were killed off. And I think that if you go back 10,000 years, 99% of the groups existing at the time have now disappeared. We are just what is left of the remaining and surviving groups. And here, when you look at the Armenians who belong to J2, what do you find? You find them all over the place. And everyone is very different from the other. And every single one of them separated from the others before we became Armenians. You do this for G, which is another group, the third largest for Armenians. Exactly the same story. Extremely diverse. We're all over the map. If you look at Georgians who are G, they're practically all part of one group. There is one Jewish G2 group. They're all G2C. We have one Armenian who seems to be a very old version of this, from the time maybe when the ancestors of both were not already differentiated. But Armenians are all over the map. So if you analyze the groups to which we belong, you see that we belong to a rainbow of 14 different groups, but these 14 different groups, you can split them into 60 different branches. And every single one of these branches was in existence before we became Armenians. So this is something rather mind-blowing, I find. We're not like all Celts and all Saxons. Armenians are very, very diverse. Now this is true on the paternal side. You might ask yourself, Maybe it's a diverse group of men who came and found one tribe of Amazon women. No. On the maternal side, it's exactly the same. Very, very diverse. It's practically the same kind of rainbow. And when you apply it to the diagram I showed, it's the same thing. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 groups which represent between 10 and 20% of Armenian female lines, very distant from each other, some separated 60,000 years ago. So very, very old. Exactly the same story. You do the same kind of analysis that I did before for the mitochondrial DNA. 13 different groups, you can split into 55 different branches, and most of them are even older than the paternal branches. So the Armenian men took their women from different places, or the Armenian women took their men from very different groups. So, this is the first surprising finding, if you want a little bit. What is an Armenian from a genetic point of view? Is there such a thing as a typical Armenian? These are questions you might ask yourself. And the answer to the first question is, I don't know. Frankly, you cannot define an Armenian from a genetic point of view. And I think it's very clear to all of you that you cannot say, by testing somebody, aha, I know he's Armenian because he belongs to that group, because he can belong to so many different groups that it's practically impossible to be sure. Now, people ask, which of these groups is typically Armenian? And here again, if you go back for maternal groups, you cannot say, yes, these are the typical Armenians. All the others are not typical Armenians. We don't know. There is no such thing as an Armenian from a genetic point of view. We are defined by our culture, by our language, by our religion, but we are not distinct. You cannot test somebody and say for sure he is an Armenian.